I'm Melinda Butterfield from the Socialist Unity Party. And I want to thank the organizers, first of all, for continuing this great series of opportunities for us to share and develop ties with one another. Today, the capitalist media is rapturous with news of the advance of the Ukrainian counteroffensive and the withdrawal of Russian troops from the Kharkov region. Less is being said about why and how this counteroffensive was made possible. The massive intervention of the Pentagon and NATO to shore up their faltering proxy war against Russia. Last week, as the Ukrainian offensive was taking shape, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a surprise visit to Kiev to pledge another $2.8 billion in military aid from Washington. For those keeping track, that brings the total in public US aid to Ukraine this year to a whopping $16.5 billion, which is more than the annual gross domestic product of 98 countries, according to the UN. This has been described as the largest single arms transfer in US history. It's also an enormous transfer of wealth to the military-industrial bourgeoisie. But in reality, as Comrade Robert alluded to a little while ago, this is just the tip of a very large iceberg that includes not only covert US funding, but also weapons, troops, and mercenaries from US-controlled NATO alliance countries. Blinken's visit was not really a surprise. It was the latest, in fact, in a long string of visits by high-ranking US officials to give marching orders to the puppet regime in Kiev. These visits date back to the very beginning of the war against Donbass in 2014 and 2015, when it was then Vice President Joe Biden, among others, who delivered the orders. The continuing infusion of massive amounts of money and weapons to the war zone removes any illusion that the Ukrainian conflict is just a brief episode in the new Cold War against Russia and China. On the contrary, the way Washington has doubled down at a time of growing economic crisis for the masses in the US and Europe shows that the ruling class intends this war to continue for a long time, to break up and dominate the Russian Federation. But they also feel the urgency to make tangible headway quickly. The ability to seduce large sections of the US population to stand with Ukraine has waned sharply with the accumulating crises facing the working class. Inflation is only the most obvious. The Biden administration is spending billions on war abroad and police at home, while funds for public health, the pandemic eviction ban, climate crisis, and education are eviscerated. This contradiction cannot be papered over forever. And of course, as many comrades have already noted, the situation will sharpen even more quickly among the West European NATO powers, which face the prospect of winter without access to cheap Russian fuel. The efforts of the organizations represented here for a genuine anti-imperialist position in the movement is making headway, however painfully slow. Here in the US, for example, this past week, the United National Anti-War Coalition has finally called for a week of action around US threats to Russia and China for mid-October. There are many factors in this decision by them, but the impact of events like this one, and on our part, I think of John Parker's visit to the Donbass frontline in May and reports back from that, influencing the rank and file of the left. That's significant. There's, from the very beginning, but even more so now, there's been genuine disillusionment and frustration with many rank and file forces in the left organizations and the anti-war movement generally, with the complete abandonment of street actions and any kind of significant opposition to the war. The importance of the Donbass struggle continues to be underappreciated, if not outright ignored by most left forces around the world. If the people of Donbass are considered at all, it is as a mere adjunct or tool of Russia. In fact, the relationship is quite different and dialectical. The explosion of resistance in eastern Ukraine after the Maidan coup in 2014, particularly in Donbass, the most working class region of Ukraine, was a tremendous breakthrough in reviving anti-fascist consciousness and internationalist solidarity rooted in the Soviet period. It reverberated through the people of all the former Soviet countries, and particularly Russia. There's a reason why Soviet flags and banners of victory are everywhere in the current anti-fascist military operation. It's not that Putin is trying to restore the USSR, as the Western media claim, or put something over on the global left. He and the Russian ruling class would love nothing more than to be rid of those symbols. But they reflect the genuine consciousness of the most active elements of the Soviet people about the stakes of the war, even 3 decades after the destruction of the USSR. Imagine trying to build an anti-imperialist movement against the Vietnam War while ignoring the struggle of the Vietnamese people. And yet, this is the standard position of the Western left on the conflict in Ukraine. The anti-fascist military alliance has succeeded in liberating much of Donetsk and Lugansk from Ukrainian occupation. But as they have advanced, Ukrainian troops have been concentrated in the well-defended areas west of the capital of Donetsk. And all summer, this has meant unrelenting, daily, brutal Ukrainian attacks on the civilian population of the city, which includes raining thousands of small anti-personnel mines on the streets, where children, senior citizens, and emergency workers have been the main victims. This heroic population, which has held strong for more than 8 years of war, is today under the worst siege of the war. The morale of this anti-fascist city is absolutely crucial to the outcome of this struggle. We must elevate the plight of the people of Donetsk and expose the grotesque war crimes of the US and Ukraine. Thank you, comrades.